Hi everyone. Very good afternoon to everyone. I am sorry for the delay due to technical problem. I am Sagar Adhujjo, President of Wings, welcoming you all to the season 2 of our lockdown talks. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, we are now all at home. So we planned this event to engage all of you with the wildlife from home with our lockdown talks. The full name of our society is Wings, that is Wildlife Information Nature Guide Society. As the name implies, we are working behind uh, providing wildlife information to our citizens and guide all towards a greener environment where human and animal can coexist peacefully. Different activities of ours can found in our Facebook pages and website. I am not elaborating those now. Today, in this season 2 of Lockdown Talk, our theme is Basics of Wildlife Photography. Mr. Puskar Basu, a renowned wildlife photographer, is with us today. So you can all see Mr. Puskar Basu now in our screen. Uh, Mr. Puskar Basu is a wildlife photographer from West Bengal, India, with us as a resource person today. Due to ever increasing human demand, wildlife of our planet is now under threat, and it is more extreme in the developing nations like India. Pushkar Babu believes that wildlife photography plays a vital role in the wildlife conservation. It is important to say that our speaker is not only a very good photographer, beside this, he is also a good mountaineer and good swimmer. His search for wildlife not only remained limited to India, his search continues to the extreme wilderness of mysterious Africa and South America. Pushkar Babu is today with us, and it is better to listen his story and his angles of view behind wildlife photography from him. Now it is important to mention that our season have two parts. First part is presentation by the resource person, and the second part is an interactive question answer session. If you have any questions, please write us in the comment. It will be answered after the presentation by our resource person. Now, my request to Pushkar Babu, please take over the session. Hope you will all enjoy the session. Thanks in advance to all. Pushkar Babu, are you audible? Hello. You can now share screen and start your presentation.
Sagar, I was unable to hear you. Okay, may I start?
Yes. Sure.
Okay. Firstly, I want to thank Shubhadeep, Sagar, Debayon, and other members of Wildlife Information and Nature Guide Society. When Shubhadeep first told me to deliver a talk on wildlife photography on this forum, I was a little bit inquisitive about what Wings actually is. So when I went inside their page, when I saw their works, I was literally overwhelmed. They are doing extremely good as far as wildlife conservation and generating interest in wildlife is concerned. And I want to commend all of them. And I want to thank and express my gratitude sincerely that you are doing a great job and you have offered me such a platform to uh, express my views on wildlife photography. Uh, as I have seen in your page, there are a lot of webinars you have conducted, and those webinars have been conducted by reputed professors and knowledgeable persons in that field. So I just hope that I'll be able to keep up with the legacy that you have started. So to begin with, my name is Puskar Basu, as introduced by Sagar. And thank you so much for the introduction that you have made about me, Sagar. And I am a wildlife photographer by passion. So beginning with wildlife photography, let's say that in the term wildlife photography, there are two words, wildlife and photography. So both the meanings of both the words are known to us. So what do we understand by wildlife photography? That is to photograph the wildlife. Now, the question comes is, amongst these two words, wildlife and photography, which is more important? Wildlife or photography? Obviously, wildlife, because without wildlife, there will be no photography. However, without photography, wildlife will survive. But when I say that, I want to say that photography is probably an inseparable part of conservation. How, I will tell you in just a couple of minutes before I start my presentation proper. I can understand that many people all across the globe are doing great job in conserving wildlife. They are running various programs. But can we actually run any conservation program without good photographs? Obviously we can, but then photographs augment those processes in much better manner. For example, if somebody is working on olive ridley turtles and he wants to approach an NGO for some funds regarding his project, the first thing that can make an NGO incline towards that project is a good photograph. There are very few people, I'll not say all, but there are very few people who have grown up in a wild environment and has grown love for wildlife. But what about most of us? From where have we grown love for wildlife? We may be connected to any conservation project, we may be connected to any organization, but the base of everything is love for wildlife. From where we have grown this love for wildlife? If we go back to our younger days, we will find that somewhere we have seen a good photograph in some book, or we have seen some good documentary in National Geographic or Discovery or Animal Planet. So those photographs, those amazing documentaries have helped us fall in love with the wildlife, and thereafter we have pursued it. So wildlife photography is an inseparable part of conserving wildlife, and in today's date, conservation is the only way to save the wildlife that we see around. And another point that I want to say before I start the presentation is that if a conservationist or a naturalist, which many of you in this group I have found are, they can turn themselves to photographers. You will create amazing photographs, amazing frames, which nobody else in this world has ever been able to. How I'll say, for example, I am a wildlife photographer by passion. I get some time for me, I plan an expedition, I go into the wild, I click photographs, and I need to leave with what I get in the wild. But a conservationist or a naturalist who is out there in the wild for 365 days, you just can't imagine what amazing moments obviously you all get to see those amazing moments. But then if you have a good camera and if you can document those moments, no wildlife photographer can match a conservationist or a naturalist. So a conservationist and a photographer is a deadly combination. It's hard to achieve, but it's not unachievable. With that, I start my presentation. It's about basics of wildlife photography. I have distributed my presentation in 3 main parts, and it will take roughly 1.5 hours to cover it. Firstly, I'll be discussing the technical aspects of photography. I'll just touch upon the technical aspects. Why I'll touch upon the technical aspects is I will cover the most important aspects or the questions that linger in a photographer's mind after handling the camera for good amount of 1 week to 6 months. The common questions that come in a photographer's mind, that I will ponder upon. Apart from that, if you are interested in any other technical informations, you are most welcome to post your comments, to communicate with me in my inbox, or you can even do extensive research on the internet. Technical things are not very difficult to get through. Once you get through the technical aspects, you'll understand that the second and the third part, that is the making an image in the wild, is much more important to make a good image in the wild, which I'll cover in much detail. And finally, I'll cover wildlife first, which I have started the presentation with saying that wildlife comes first compared to photography. So these are the three heads in which I am going to cover my topic. First, I'll be discussing the technical aspects. Okay. Now, to begin with, we must know what are the kinds of wildlife photographs. There are 6 categories shown in the view file. Environmental portraits, in which the environment is also included along with the species, or which we call as habitat shots. Second are the full body portraits, where not much of the environment is covered. However, the entire body of the species concerned is in the photograph. And third is a frame filling portrait, which we can compare with normal a human portrait, that is focusing on the head or the face or some particular part of body of the species concerned. Fourthly, gestures. Whenever animals communicate with each other, they show or exhibit some kind of gestures. If we can photograph them, those are called gesture photography. And finally, and the most important one, is the behavior. That is what actually is the crux of wildlife photography, if we can capture behaviors of a particular species. Finally, we have got fine art photography, which includes silhouettes, slow shutter, panning, high and low key images. Now, we will see throughout this presentation, we will see a lot of photographs. As far as fine art photography is concerned, I do click silhouettes, so I'll be able to show you silhouettes. But slow shutter, panning, high and low key images, I'm actually not much inclined to. Hence, I don't shoot such kind of photographs. Rest, I will show you all kind of photographs, and whatever we learn in this course of presentation, we will see it through examples. Examples means photographs that I have clicked in the wild. Okay, first, environmental portrait. Now, many of you must be knowing the species that you can see in the view file is a chiru or a Tibetan antelope. Now, let me take 2 minutes to tell you about chiru, because this species will not come any further in this presentation. We have all heard about Pashmina shawls that actually originate from Kashmir and other Tibetan locations. Many of us have not heard about something more expensive, which is called shatush. Shatush is actually called soft gold. A scarf or a muffler of shatush can cost you approximately 10 lakh rupees. 1 lakh to 10 lakh, depending on the length. That particular garment comes from the fur of this species. And that is why this animal has been poached extensively all across Tibet, and its population has declined drastically. It's not easy to see a chiru or a Tibetan antelope in the wild. They as such are not residents. They migrate from higher Tian Shan ranges up to Ladakh and sometimes go to North Sikkim as well. So that is chiru. This is the species that is in focus. And presently, the use of shatush is banned. However, still some poaching still takes place, and people or poachers go on killing this animal in the wild. So this is a example of a environmental portrait or a habitat shot in which the chiru or Tibetan antelope is seen in a backdrop of a barren Ladakhi landscape. Next is a full body portrait. Here, much of the environment is not included, whereas the leopard jumping across a river and the full body of the leopard is shown over here. Third is a frame filling portrait. As I have told, you can see the face of the lioness feeding on a killed wildebeest, and that is how a frame filling portrait looks like. Gestures. Here are two lion cubs playing with each other, and their gestures are very similar to that of human childs. So that is what is called gesture photography, where we can capture the gestures that the wild animals share amongst each other. Behavior. Now there is a story in this photograph as well. You can see this is a very common scene. Anybody going to Mangla Jodi will be able to see it. But what is the story inside it? The purple heron has captured a snake. It has snatched it from the water hyacinth that we can see under his feet. Now, at this point of time, the head of the snake is gone. It is beheaded. But still, the snake has not given up fighting. It has spiraled or coiled around the beak of the purple heron. And if this continues, if the purple heron is unable to win over the snake, the purple heron eventually may die also. So that is the story. Whatever happens to you, don't give up. That is the behavior that I have tried to photograph in this particular frame. Finally, talking about fine art photography, a silhouette, a fantastic sunrise of Masai Mara, where we can see in the foreground two giant African elephants exhibiting courtship amongst each other with the backdrop of the sunrise. Okay, now coming on to basics of camera settings. We all know, but however, I'll pitch it at the very basic level. I'll take it a person who even does not know this. I'll explain from that point of view. There are three basic things. We know light or exposure is everything which makes or break a photograph. Now there are three basic things. One is aperture, one is ISO, and one is shutter speed. Now these three are interconnected. We will take one by one. What is aperture? Aperture is the opening of the lens. Lower the number, that is lower the aperture, that is f1.4, 2.84, wider is the opening. And as we go higher, that is f11, 16, 32, smaller is the opening. So when the opening is larger or wider, we get more amount of light incident in the sensor. And when the opening is smaller, we get small amount of light in the sensor. So that is how we can adjust light through aperture. But what changes in this connection is the depth of field. Now what is depth of field? Depth of field is the zone of focusing which gets focused simultaneously when we focus on a particular subject. For example, we are focusing on a lion or any subject in that matter. So the zone which is ahead or rear getting focused simultaneously is called depth of field. So we can shallow down that depth of field or we can widen that depth of field. When we are at the widest aperture, that is 1.4, 2.84 or something of that sort, the depth of field is very shallow. We can use this for blurring the background effectively. Whereas when the aperture increases, that is f11, 16, 22, 32, the aperture gets small and the depth of field increases. That is a large amount of area gets under focus. We can use this when we are trying to photograph or keep in focus multiple subjects in a particular frame located at different depths. Second thing is shutter speed. Lesser the shutter speed, that is 1/10th of a second, 1/4th of a second, half of a second, 1 second, 2 seconds, up to 30 seconds. The amount of light comes inside the sensor in a the amount of light is much greater. Whereas once we increase the shutter speed, that is, we go by 1 by 500, 600, 800, 2000, the amount of light incident on the sensor is less. What happens in bargain is, once we increase the shutter speed, we can freeze a motion. However, the light lessens. When we lower the shutter speed, what happens is, increase the shutter speed rather, that means 1/10, 1 second, half second, 30 seconds, we get more amount of light. We can use this for shooting night photographs, Milky Way or something of that sort. However, in that case, the motion gets blurry because till the time the shutter opens, a lot of motion happens in front of us. Third is ISO. Lower the ISO, lesser is the sensitivity, lesser is the amount of light. Higher the ISO, more is the sensitivity, more is the amount of light incident on the sensor. What happens in bargain? Lower the ISO, lesser is the number of grains. So all the three aspects that I have told cannot be pushed to the extreme. We need to make a balance. We cannot push the ISO up to 25,600 or 52,000 because that will acquire a lot of grains. We cannot come down to ISO 100 also at all point of time because the light may not be sufficient. Similarly, for depth of field, we may need to include some other features in the environment. We may need to keep it in focus. So we may not always go for the widest aperture or the shallowest depth of field. Same is the case for shutter speed. We always want to freeze things. We always want to freeze a bird in flight, but we cannot do that at all point of time depending on the light situations. So these are the things that we need to struggle with, we need to learn, and we need to apply on ground to get a good photograph. Okay. Now, many people ask me, what are the perfect camera settings? Now that we know what is ISO, what is shutter speed, and what is aperture, we can discuss with this. Now, that is the challenge of wildlife photography. Nobody can give you a prescription that this is the perfect shutter speed, because every second situation is different, and you need to apply your experience, your learnings to devise your own shutter speed, your own aperture, your own ISO. So like there is no perfect camera, there are no perfect settings. Best camera is the eye, and best setting are there in the mind. So just by telling that, I'll not leave it over there. I definitely give a solution to this. What are the settings? Now, the settings that I'm talking about is a little different. A wildlife photographer's camera should always be ready on a particular set of settings. What is that settings? Those settings are keeping in mind the most adverse conditions. Why so? We all go in forests, we all go in safaris, and we know that wildlife are most active during either the early hours or the late hours of the day when the light is less. Once we go early in the morning, how many times, I don't know how many times it has happened with you, but it has happened with me many times, that I am there in a jungle for a good amount of week searching for a particular species, let's say a tiger. I have not seen a tiger since last 6 or 7 days. Suddenly, on the 8th day, early morning, when I am out there, I saw a tiger. And the tiger is in a rush. It is just rushing from one side of the road to the other. I just pick up my camera. And once I pick up the camera, I see that my shutter speed is, for example, set at 15 seconds because I was shooting Milky Way last night. The aperture is, for example, f11, 12, 16. Or the ISO has been boosted up to, for example, 25,600, something of that sort. And to top it up, I have forgotten to place my card inside the camera because I was downloading my photographs last night on my laptop and I have forgotten to replace it. So these are the things that we face in wildlife photography. And as a wildlife photographer, this should be our first instinct, that we should keep always our camera ready on a particular settings, so that if a wildlife comes in front of me, I can just pick up the camera and take at least a documentary shot. Now, as I said, I'll keep these settings considering the most adverse conditions. If the conditions are not adverse, trust you me, in most of the cases, you will get time to adjust your settings. But let's consider, as of now, the worst conditions. So what can be those worst conditions? Extreme low light, extremely fast moving subject, and extreme poor visibility due to foliage and other obstacles. So if that be so, then what should be our shutter speed? I keep my shutter speed always on my camera by default in between 1/400 to 1/600. That depends on the lens that I am using. I always keep my longest lens ready because the wildlife may be far away. If it is near, again, I may have the chance to adjust my settings. I'll get some time. So what is that depending on the lens? How does my shutter speed matters? Because once I put up a very long lens, with the magnification, our shake also gets magnified. So the thumb rule says the focal length that you are operating on, your minimum shutter speed should not cross the reciprocal of that. So if you are photographing at say 300 millimeter on a DX body, so your effective focal length is now 450 millimeter. So your shutter speed should not go below 1/450. There is no setting called 450, so it should not come below 1/500. So that is what you should keep your shutter speed to. 1/400 to 1/600 is generally I keep, depending on the lens that I have mounted on the camera. Aperture should be wide open to make maximum light incident on the sensor. If it is a f2.8 lens, to 2.8. If it is a 4 lens, then f4. If it is f5.6 lens, so 5.6. ISO. Now I will take 2 minutes to ponder upon this. ISO, you keep it to 100, but you keep a upper limit of that ISO and set that ISO into automatic setting. What does that mean? Your ISO in the camera is by default at 100. However, the limit that you have set, camera will increase the ISO up to that level depending on the light situations, but will never cross that limit. So what happens is, what is that higher ISO, or that higher limit? It depends from camera to camera. More than that, it depends from person to person. I, for example, has got a D810, Nikon D810. Now my acceptability in that camera is up to ISO 4000. Now that the grain that I get in ISO 4000 may not be acceptable to you. So you say ISO 4000 image of a D810 is very grainy. So to your eyes, ISO 2000 may be the maximum limit. Even to some person, ISO 8000 may be the maximum limit. So it differs from person to person. So you see, during your leisure time, you practice with this, understand what is your acceptability limit, and set your maximum ISO of your camera up to that level. Thirdly, you must shoot in RAW. If under such circumstances, and it is not if, it is most certainly going to happen, that you are going to get a dark image. When you get a dark image, you will be able to bring out those exposures in RAW. But if you click in JPEG, those post-processing techniques will never come into play. So you will have to shoot in RAW. And lastly, AF continuous, that is continuous photofocus mode. So when you click a photograph, you consider that the subject will be in motion, and you keep your focusing mode in continuous. We will ponder upon the continuous focus mode a little later in a much more detailed manner. Okay, this is probably the most important thing as far as a photograph goes, the technical aspect of a photograph goes. Composition. Now, in every genre of photography, nobody can teach anybody composition. It is how you see, but there are certain rules which has been experimented earlier and has paid good results. So those are enumerated in the rules of composition. Firstly, we need to understand what is composition. In a frame, apart from the subject, there are many elements, like it can be a tree, it can be another species of the, sorry, it can be another individual of the same species. Many elements. Now, the way a photographer arranges those elements so that a viewer who is viewing that image can go directly or get attracted directly to that part of the frame where the photographer wants him or her to do. That is what composition means, that a photographer is forcing a viewer to look into that part of the photograph where he wants it. So there are many rules, but these 7 rules are what I found to be primary and to be kept in mind. We will see this with examples. First is rule of thirds. If we divide our frame vertically and horizontally into 3 parts each, then we get 4 intersection points. These are called the power points. Trust you me, these 4 points are the most important points in a particular frame. And a viewer's eyes first go in these one of these 4 points only. So firstly and foremostly, we must not keep our subject at the center. Or I'll not say subject. A subject can be a very elongated thing, like this token that we see in the frame. The eye of the token for me is the most important thing as far as this frame is concerned. So that thing, that eye of that token is required to be kept in one of those power points. Now, which of those power points? That I will discuss subsequently. So the most important or the point of interest which you want to show to the viewer should be kept in one of those 4 points as far as the rule of thirds is concerned. Okay. Second is use of diagonals. It is very monotonous and we always see flat horizons, flat grounds. Good. We cannot do much about it if a flat ground is there in front of us. But whenever we get a diagonal, we must make use of it. This diagonal wall of snow on which this particular snow leopard is climbing is giving a dynamicity to this image. Imagine the same frame with a flat horizon and again come back to this frame. You'll understand the difference. Now, drawing a connection with the first point, that is that rule of thirds, in which of those 4 power points we need to keep our subjects. Now, our subjects are full of life. Depending on their posture, we need to place them inside the frame. Now, firstly, we need to understand what is negative space and what is positive space. In a frame, the subject itself makes the positive space and rest everything is called negative space. So, negative space in a frame should so included that the species can look inside the frame or can have a scope of getting inside the frame. Now see, I have placed the great barbet on top left power point. If I would have placed it on top right, then its face would have been looking outside the frame, which wouldn't have been very pleasing. So it is looking inside the frame if I have placed it on top left. So that's how we must arrange our negative space. So this will help you decide on which of the 4 power points you need to place your subject. Again, why it has been placed on top? Because it has got a scope of coming down. So that is why I have kept the lower part of the image empty, giving it a space to come down. So that is how we can follow the rule of thirds, as well as we can arrange negative space in that way. Foreground, midground, and background. This is more pertinent for landscape photographers. However, it's not difficult to achieve in wildlife photography as well. Now, why we need to do this? We must understand that our photographs are two-dimensional. It has only got X and Y axis. So this foreground, midground, and background helps us to create a depth inside the image that we call as Z axis. Here in this frame, the grass in front comprises the foreground, the cub itself is the midground, and the mother who is monitoring her cub from background is the background of the image. So a depth is being understood from the grass in the front up to the lioness at the backdrop. Leading lines. This is probably one of the most important compositional rules. We need to search for lines inside a frame which leads to our subject. Now this signature spider, if we see, there are a lot of spider webs which are directed to the spider. So these actually are acting as leading lines to the spider. Now this is a very simple example. I have given it just for your understanding. Leading lines is actually not easy to get, but it is how we visualize. For example, I'll give another example. A bird is sitting on a tree or a particular branch. If we just click a frame, it is an ordinary frame. Whereas if we can direct the branch in such a way, or rather we can place ourselves or move ourselves in such a way that the branch is coming towards us, then we can create a leading line from the camera to that bird. So that will create a leading line. So we can devise our own leading lines, or visualize rather how we can use natural elements as leading lines towards our subject. Background color. This is the most underestimated or underrated composition rules, but I find this rule to be very, very important. Not all subjects are colorful, like this cayman, which I have shot in South America. Now, this cayman is itself colorless. If I click it with a dull background, again the photograph will be a dull one. So when the subject itself is colorless, we look for colors at the background. It is like, for example, you are flipping through many color images. Okay, that is fine. But suddenly a black and white image comes in between. You get stuck. Oh, what image? So this composition is like that. And the background is colored, background is colorful, and the subject itself is colorless. That is helping the subject to pop out. So background colors, if the subject itself is not colorful, we can search or look for colorful backgrounds to make good images. Okay. Lastly, it's use of scales, which is very, very important. Now we have got a very cute elephant calf on the left of the screen. Now it's a good photograph, you can say, but to me it's not a good photograph. Why? Because we don't know how large or how small this elephant calf is. If we can add a key element with this frame, it may be a tree, it may be anything whose size is known to us. If we can include such element just for reference, then we can say how large or how small this elephant is. So I have tried photographing it along with his mom, and then we can understand how actually small this elephant calf is. Apart from that, those compositional rules, there are few indispensable ingredients. I'll not read out this foil, I'll just go over to examples. First is eye and ear contact. Now we have heard about eye contacts when the species or the subject is looking towards the photographer or the camera. But what is ear contact? We know that mostly the ears of wild animals, they rotate in all possible directions. Some can rotate even 360 degrees. Why? They pick up sounds from different directions. Now, when those ears are directed towards somewhere else, even though the eyes are directed towards the photographer, it gives a sense that you have not earned the attention. The species is not fully concentrating on you. I am saying it's not mandatory. It's not necessary to always make a species aware about you. You can take a photograph of it moving or doing some normal behavior or something of that sort. But when the animal or the species, firstly, whenever a photographer comes into the field of view of an animal, be rest assured he or she will see you before you see him or her. So you have got his attention irrespective of whatever is happening in the environment. So if you can click a photograph where the particular species is looking towards you, it creates or establishes a special connection with the viewer, not with the photographer. A viewer who is seeing that photograph, he or she can establish a connection if the species is looking towards the viewer. Similarly, with the eyes locked on to the viewer, if the ears are rotating left and right, it does not. It gives a sense that he is half attentive. So if the ears are also pointed towards the photographer or the camera, that creates a special attention. Below eye level perspective. Till now, we have seen photographs, or the recent trend is we can photograph species from eye level. That is, we come down to their eye level. But that has grown to be very common these days. So now the newest perspective is we go down even below that. You can see in this particular photograph, I am even below the eyes of the caiman. So that is which gives a depth or 3D impression to the image, or it actually gives a dominating posture of the species concerned. If I would have clicked this from the top, it would have been a very mundane image. Background. Background is very, 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 very important, and it is equally important as that of the subject. We click a photograph as soon as we see a species. We click a photograph. That's good. That's good for documentation purpose. But for example, let's take this shikra. I have clicked a photograph as soon as it landed on this particular branch. The background is somewhat good, but then I was not satisfied with the background. You can see the bokeh, those round shaped bokehs, but I generally don't like photographs with sky backgrounds. That gives a very bland look. So after this, I maneuvered myself to get a better photograph, and I got this. You can see by seeing the posture of the branches that I have moved myself a little left. After that, I have achieved this frame. So you must keep in view the background also. That will fetch you a very pleasing frame. Communicate mood or behavior. That is what I said is the most important factor, or you can make an image really pop up with such things. You can see over here a turtle is trying to climb or actually has climbed on top of a caiman's head. And you can see a lot of turtles floating around this caiman. So this is what I have tried to portray in this frame. Both the caiman and the turtle are ectothermic. They both need to warm themselves out in the sun frequently. So the caimans have no other option rather than popping their head out or go out in the banks. Whereas these turtles have got the option to mount on their head to do so. And those turtles know that the caimans are not a threat, because as soon as the caiman will try to eat that turtle, it will go inside the shell. And caimans are small crocodiles. Their jaws are not so powerful to crush a turtle shell. Knowing that, those turtles take full advantage and they mount on the caimans. Surprisingly, the caimans are also not much bothered. They, if they would have been bothered, they would have dived down inside the water, but they don't do that. they are very comfortable with that posture. So that is the mood or the behavior that I have tried to photograph in this particular frame. Golden hour. We must look for golden hours. That brings out a very beautiful effect in the frame. You can see three cheetahs running for a hunt, and it is the golden light that is just before the sun sets or just after the sun rises. That is when the sun throws out golden rays and create a golden effect in your image, and it looks awesome. We know about golden hours, but the recent trend that we are seeing these days is the blue hour photography, that is going beyond the golden hours. That is after the sun has set in and before the sun would have risen. So that is called the blue hour, where we can take excellent silhouette shots, and that is the example of a blue hour. Okay, now I'll just discuss on two things. As I said, I'll discuss on only those issues of technical aspects which beginner photographers struggle with. So one is metering and second is focusing. These are the two things of which I get maximum questions. So I'll be discussing those two things so that it's easy for you to operate on these two things. Now metering. What is metering? We as wildlife photographers take the help of the camera to ascertain the light in the frame and adjust our settings accordingly. Now, what happens is we have got basically three modes in our DSLRs. One is aperture priority, that is A in Nikon and AV in Canon. Second is shutter priority, which is S in Nikon and TV in Canon. And third is full manual mode. These are the three modes in which a wildlife photographer should operate, and rather than going into any automatic modes. Now, as far as aperture priority is concerned, the photographer adjusts the aperture, and understanding the light, the camera gives a befitting shutter speed in return. It is just the opposite in shutter priority. The shutter speed is adjusted by the photographer and the camera returns with a adequate aperture. And in manual mode, what happens? In full manual mode, the photographer, he adjusts the shutter speed also and the aperture also. However, if the ISO is auto, the camera adjusts the ISO accordingly. And if all the three things are manual, that is the aperture, the shutter speed and the ISO, all three things are manual and nothing is left for the camera, then you can see the photograph at the very bottom of the photograph that is there in the view file. There is a small indicator which shows if the image is going to come up bright or it is going to come up dark. If it is on the plus side, it is going to come up bright. If it is on the dark side, it is going to come up dark. So it is our responsibility to adjust our settings in such a way that that indicator is in zero. We as beginner photographers don't have the habit of looking into that particular thing inside the viewfinder, but it is very, very important to look. So having understood that, there are three modes of metering. One is matrix or evaluative metering, as we say in Canon, matrix in Nikon and evaluative in Canon. So in matrix metering, what happens is the camera judges the light of the entire frame. It divides the frame into various segments and thereafter takes a resultant out of that, gives it to the camera, and the camera returns you with the average setting. Now, this is not perfect for wildlife photography because generally our subject is small compared to the frame itself. So if we take the light of the entire frame, we may go wrong. So it is good for landscapes, but not for wildlife. Center weighted metering. Center weighted metering takes light from 4 to 6 millimeter of the center of the frame only. Now, why I say 4 to 6 centimeter? Because you can adjust that diameter. Some cameras give you the option to adjust that 4 centimeter, 5 centimeter, 6 centimeter. So once you do that, you can pick up the light from the center of the frame. Now you can say that now only I have told I should not be placing my subject at the center of the frame. So why should I be taking the illumination of the center of the frame? Obviously that is there. But another thing which you can do is you can place the subject at the center of the frame, take the exposure, take the settings, lock that exposure in that particular, and thereafter rotate the frame and compose your shot, and thereafter click. That is what you can do with center weighted metering. But at any cost, you cannot move center weighted metering from center to anywhere else. The illumination will be taken from the center of the frame. Now spot metering. Spot metering takes light only from 2 millimeter of the frame. However, you can move this spot along with your focus point. The way you can maneuver your focus points all across the frame, the spot metering point can also be maneuvered along with your focus points. That is the good part. But what is the bad part? As a beginner photographer, it might be a little difficult to handle spot metering. Remember that it is taking only 2 millimeter of the frame, which may not be giving the exact exposure of the frame. So you need to place that particular spot at a place which is neither too bright nor too dark, somewhere in between, which we call as gray. Then only you will be able to get a good exposure for the frame. I generally recommend to use center weighted metering for initial few years of photography. It is good to go with that. Even today also I use center weighted metering in most of the times. After that, once you are comfortable with center weighted metering, you can graduate onto spot metering. But trust you me, center weighted metering will do a decent job as far as wildlife photography is concerned. There is one thing that I'll also like to tell. There is something called exposure compensation. Now, once we do exposure compensation, what happens? If there is a small plus minus button in everybody's camera, that is the exposure compensation button. I'll not say much about it. Only is that button is there for you to tell the camera that if you want the image to be a little bright or a little dark of what the camera is giving you. So when to use that? If a particular frame is too bright, for example, it's full of snow, so at that point of time, you should push the exposure compensation slightly by +1/3 or +2/3 towards the brighter side. And if the image is dark, generally the major portion of the image is dark, then you should be pushing the exposure compensation button towards the negative. So to remember, brighter scenes, bright, darker scenes, push more to the dark. That is because the camera converts everything to gray. If it is bright, you will want the photograph to be bright, but the camera will by default convert it to gray. So you need to push the exposure compensation to the brighter side so that you get the brightest bright. Similarly, if it is dark, again camera will increase the exposure and will make it gray. So you need to push the exposure compensator to the dark so that the dark remains dark, right? So that is how you should be setting your metering mode in the camera. And remember one thing, if there is a very high contrast image, which we most commonly face, a very bright portion in the image and a very dark portion in the image, take the exposure of the brighter part. Take the exposure of the brighter part, because if we take the exposure of the brighter part, the dark part will get darker and we will be able to bring out details in post-processing. But if we take the exposure of the darker part, the brighter part will get blown out and we will not be able to recover details in post-processing. So that is how we should be, these things should be kept in mind for adjusting our metering. So these are the three modes of metering: the matrix metering, the center weighted metering, and the spot metering. Now, this is a very important thing called histogram, which I will say is we generally neglect. It is important, but we generally neglect. We after clicking a photograph, we go on checking the photograph in the LCD, whereas your LCD is neither calibrated nor it is clearly visible under a bright sun. So you don't actually get to see how the photograph has actually come. And when you put that same photograph in laptop or your computer desktop or something, then you see a very different exposure. So if you learn to see histograms, you'll be in a much better state. The histogram ranges from 0 to 255. If it is pushing ahead of 0, your photograph is grossly underexposed. You can see the example of the leopard. If your histogram, the graph, is pushed ahead of 255, it is overexposed. There are blown out areas in the image, as you can see in the middle image. And finally, if your graph has covered the entire range that has started from 0 to 255, then it is perfectly exposed, as you can see in the last image. So we must learn to see histogram to what do you say, check how the exposure has come in our photograph. Next, we have got the focusing part. Now, this is a holy grail of beginner photographers, that how do I photograph specially moving subjects. I'll try and clear that. To understand that, first we come to what are the difficulties that we face in focusing. The first difficulty is in our mind. We purchase a camera with a lot of focusing points, 51, 153 and whatnot, infinity, and we think that now we can rest and the camera will do its job. No, the camera will not do anything. We will have to tell the camera what to do. How? Because let's say an example. You are given a task to search a bird in 200 square kilometers. And you are also given a task to search that same bird in 1 square kilometer. Which one will be faster? You will obviously search that bird in 1 square kilometer of area. So same thing happens with the camera. If you task it with 153 points, it keeps on searching throughout the frame. And that is very crucial when a bird flies. So you cannot task a camera with 153 points. We must learn to task the camera with as many less points as possible. We will see how. Secondly, when we are using very long lenses, we say that, okay, I have kept the camera on the subject, but still frames are coming out of focus. That is because your camera is very fast. It is in continuous mode. Obviously, it has to be in continuous mode when you are clicking subjects in flight. Now what happens is your hand is shaking, even though very minutely, but it is shaking, and that shake is being magnified by your lens. Now, for example, a bird is being perched on a particular tree, and for your shake, what is happening is the camera is first seeing the bird, and in the very next moment, it is seeing the branch behind. So what is happening is, at one instance, it is focusing on the bird, and in the second instance, it is focusing on the branch behind. So what is happening is, even if you are clicking on burst mode, you'll get some images which are out of focus, because on those instances the camera has focused on the branch behind. So it is more convenient to carry a light lens as possible. Third is, we have got distracting elements in the frame. Bush, tree, rock, foliage, basically, through which we need to see. And the camera's autofocus malfunctions at this point of time. So that is where a photographer's job comes into play. Every autofocus comes with a manual override, which we don't use. Your focusing ring is always hunting. It is searching for a subject to focus on. When it is hunting, you can just tweak it a little with your fingers. Look, see, this is the subject. And thereafter, your camera will see on that subject perfectly. So you need to guide the focusing ring also, which we don't do. One button of your camera should always be customized, though it is not required to be customized in these days, because most of the cameras come with various a particular button which through which you can toggle between AFS, AFC, but that is single autofocus, continuous autofocus. But if it is not there, you must customize one of your button for doing the same. Otherwise, if at every point of time you need to go to the menu to change your autofocus modes, your subject will fly. Second is depth of field. I have said wider depth of field. Sorry, I have told you about depth of field. So if you keep your depth of field a little wide, that is by smalling down your aperture. Then what happens is when a subject is moving, it is actually changing distance from the camera. So if your depth of field is wide, it will remain within the focusing zone for longer period. If you keep it very shallow with a wider aperture, what will happen? You will get some shots which are out of focus because the depth of field is shallow and the subject will move in and out of that zone very frequently. So these are the common things of which the remedies, as I have told. Now, generally, how the camera focuses is a very long subject, but there are two things that I will like you to focus on is we say that there are cross type focusing points. What is cross type? The more the number of cross type focusing sensors, better it is for the camera to focus. Cross type sensors are those which can detect motion both in vertical and horizontal axis. Other focus points just detect those on the vertical axis. So cross type sensors are more effective in detecting autofocus. And one more thing that you must know is whatever the aperture in your lens is, for example, it is f8, 11, 16, whatever, you need to keep your aperture wide open. I told that wrong. Your lens automatically goes to the widest aperture while focusing. For example, the aperture on my lens is f11 or 16 or something of that sort. Still, it will go to the widest opening for focusing and return back to the setting once I am pressing the shutter. So, a f2.8 lens will focus faster than a f4 lens, which is even more faster than a f5.6 lens. So, that is how it works. Now, on which focusing mode to operate? AFS or one shot or stationary shot is the only option when your subject is at a particular place. AFC or AF continuous is the mode to go when subject is in motion, and AFA, that is AF automatic or AI focus, is the mode to go when when you are unable to detect if the subject is going to remain stationary or move. But that is not a very recommended mode to go. AFC is the mode that we will focus on at this point of time. AFC has got three sub modes, that is dynamic, 3D and group. Now 3D mode activates all 153 points or all points in your camera. So that is not a mode to recommended to go. In dynamic, you can choose 1 points, 9 points, 21 points, 51 points, 72 points. The number of points may vary from camera to camera, but these are the general settings. So in this, the most effective that I find is 21 points to begin with. But what you need to do once you have selected 21 points, you need to keep any of those 21 points along with the subject which is in flight or which is running. So that is where the job of a photographer comes into play. Remember the first point I said, you don't task the camera with all the points. You reduce the number of points and do your job of keeping those points fixed on the subject which is in motion. So 21 points is the first setting to start with. Once you are comfortable with the 21 points, now graduate on to 9 points. You cannot go to 1 point because that is very difficult for keeping 1 point on the subject. But if you select 21 points, one of those 21 points ought to be on the subject. So first start with 21 points and then with graduate to 9 points. Once even better, once you are okay with 9 points, then you graduate onto something called group focus, which is only using 5 points. So that is what focusing modes are all about. With this, I come to the end of the technical part. Almost 1 hour is over. I'll just that's what happens. The technical part is very a little bit boring, and it takes a little bit of time. So I want to sum this part up with a saying that when a cheetah runs, our instinct works, not our learning. So whatever we have learned so far, we need to put that as our instincts. At that point of time, when a cheetah will run in front of you, you will not have time to think and put your settings in place. So at that point of time, your instincts will work, that even if your brain does not work, your finger will automatically put those settings. So that is how, if you can bring those things in your instincts, you'll be able to take good photographs. Okay. After this, we come on to something called making an image in the wild. And as I said, this is the most important part of making a good image in the wild. Okay. So I have distributed this part in 3 main subheads. RPS, that is the RPS factor, which is the research, planning, and shooting. Now, what is research? You need to research about the particular animal species that you are trying to photograph. What you need to research upon is its behavior, its habits, and instincts. We will see all these with examples, my personal examples, so that we can relate. Secondly, location. Now, what will location fetch us? It will help us in 2 things. Firstly, how to include the environment in a particular frame, if it is full of foliage, if it is having a water body, if it is having snow-capped peaks. If we go to Amboseli and we don't know that we can see Kilimanjaro at the back of those huge giant mammoths, then it's no use. So we need to learn about a particular place, its terrain, before going over there. And secondly, it also helps in off-land expeditions. If you want to go deep inside the jungle, plan your own expedition, then you need to also calculate what are the natural resources available over there, where are waters available, where there is no water, where we can get natural wood for cooking food and all that. So those are the research that you need to make. Second is planning. The best time to find a particular species, and trust you me, for wildlife photographers, wildlifers obviously, it is the least comfortable time. The worst time is the best time. That's what we say, that the least comfortable time is the best time to see a particular species. Pre-visualization. It is said that a good photograph is clicked 1,000 times before it is actually clicked. So you need to imagine a particular frame. Otherwise, once you go into the wild, you see a species, you will not know what to do. If you have imagined a particular frame with that species, then probably you will struggle to get that frame. And that is where you'll get a good frame. Otherwise, you will not wait. You will see what is just being offered to you, and you will come back from that place. Third is gear, a very important thing. Everybody asks what camera to buy, what lenses to buy. Fine, good enough, but remember that your equipments will vary with the location and the subject. So whatever your research you have done with the animal or something or the location, your gear will be determined by that. You cannot go in shooting blue whales under the water with a 800mm lens. There is no point carrying that lens over there. So you need to plan your equipments. Finally, when we come down to shooting, We must understand what should be the action or the posture. We must understand when a bird is going to take a flight. If we don't estimate that, if we don't have that knowledge, that bird will fly and we will not have the time to photograph it. Unique perspective. Learn from photographers, learn from people who have gone over there, but purposely don't repeat that. Devise or improvise your own perspective. That will help your frame stand out of the rest. A frame, for example, somebody has clicked. If I go and just make a similar frame, it may be a very good frame. People will give 100 likes in that and will forget on the next day. But if you can make a frame which nobody has seen, it will create a mark. So that is what you need to keep in mind, unique perspective. Why it is a new telephoto? In recent days, we have seen that if we can go close to that particular species, it will fetch an excellent photograph. So obviously, I take a photograph with my longest lens, initially for a record shot. Thereafter, I try to approach that wildlife in the most convenient way of that wildlife. It should be convenient to the wildlife first. If it permits me to enter its danger circle, I do that and I shoot it with a wide angle lens. That gives a unique perspective. Again, we will see with examples. And photographer is the best zoom. That's what I said. You need to zoom. You need to place yourself in, you need to act as a zoom. You need to place yourself in such a way that you can actually go or near the species. Convey a story. Your shot must convey a story. We will see it with examples. And keep post-processing in mind. That is the last thing that we do. We never keep the post-processing in mind. We will see how it helps. Once we take a photograph, if we keep post-processing in mind, how it helps. First, the R factor, that is the research. I'll give examples. Habitats. We need to learn about habitats. When I went to Masai Mara, I studied about lions. Now, I was very keen in photographing lions with lion cubs. Now, when I started studying about these, I came to know that in Masai Mara, these lions, they look for a place where they can keep their cubs hidden from predators like hyenas, and also where the hunting is easy. That means where a lot of antelopes or a lot of wild beasts are available. So there is again I studied further and found that there is a location called double crossing. Basically, there is a road crossing two rivers. That's why it's called a double crossing area. So once I reached that place, I found it is exactly true, and I got amazing shots of lions with lion cubs. So that is the benefit of learning about habitats. Behaviors. We go on shooting purple herons with catching snakes in Mangla Jodi, but lot many attempts of ours goes into failure. What happens? We look inside through the viewfinder on a particular purple heron, hoping that it will now make a catch, it will now make a catch, it will now make a catch, but it doesn't. After 10-15 minutes, we get depressed, we move ourselves from the camera, and at that point of time only that purple heron goes inside the water and picks up that particular snake. So if we study and understand how a purple heron goes for a catch, probably we'll be able to make better frames. Once we see a purple heron, it is just standing like that. It may not be keen in capturing a fish or a snake. So we can just not invest our time on it and we can move on. There are so many purple herons in Mangla Jodi. We can just move on to the next one. But if we see a particular purple heron who is deeply looking inside the water with interest, then we can say that it is trying to do something. So we can halt over there. After that, once it tracks a particular prey, that is a snake or a fish, it swings a little to adjust its movement along with the movement of its prey. That is the time when we should see through the viewfinder and keep ourselves ready for that perfect moment. And after that, as soon as it snatches, we can go on for checking and we can get good moments. That is the benefit of studying behavior of a particular species. Now, instincts. I'll again give examples. Hippopotamus, hippos. I went on clicking hippopotamus in Africa, and you see, we go to zoo and we see that these hippos, they lie inside the water. Most of us know that hippos are unable to swim. They cannot swim. They walk on the bed of the river as deep as possible. But there is one peculiar thing. In zoo, we go to see hippos, we don't get to see them. They are lying under the water and we move off. But once I came to know that these hippos, they are unable to stay inside the water for more than 7 minutes, that gave me a whole new window of photographing them. Because I knew exactly that that particular hippo is unable to stay inside the water for more than 7 minutes. It needs to come out to breathe. So even during sleeping, while they sleep inside the water on the riverbed, it is their instinct that their sleeping body floats, takes breath, and goes down. And that happens after every 7 minutes. Now 7 minutes is the maximum time. Generally, it happens within a frequency of 3 to 5 minutes. When I came to know that, I locked my focus on a particular hippo rather than rotating my camera all around, and I got amazing frames. So learning about instincts of a particular species may fetch us good frames. As far as the location is concerned, we must know when the golden hour is going to take place, when the sun is going to rise, when the sun is going to set. By knowing this, we can go or reach a particular location during the golden hours or even in the blue hours, as discussed. Precipitation. The amount of snowfall or the amount of rainfall that we are going to face in a particular location during our visit will determine the amount of protection that we should take for our gears, and we can also plan our shoot accordingly. Some people include those snowflakes, those raindrops inside their frame and create amazing frames. So precipitation is something to be learned. Now, once we have done our research, we come on to the planning factor. As I said, worst time is the best time. Cats, leopards, tigers, the peak of the summers where we are going to sweat like anything. That is the time for clicking cats. Boas in summer. This is a photograph of an anaconda. Now, the best time to photograph anacondas are in the peak of the summers. That is when the water holes dry up and the anacondas migrate from one dried up water hole to the next nearest water hole. They often die in doing so, but that is the best time to see them and photograph them. If we go in monsoons, they will go inside such corners that it's very difficult to photograph them. Snow leopards, again, they live in high mountains, but the best time to photograph them is the peak of the winters. That is when they come down from their higher reaches and offers us with their visibility. Macro in monsoon. Although the entire year is good for macro, but the best time is in the monsoons. And as I said, a part of your planning, you must visualize a particular frame. I have imagined about this frame 1,000 times before landing in that particular location. When I saw this lion, it was much before the sunset. Though I know that the sunset is going to happen over there, and since I imagined that frame, I waited over there and I was able to capture this frame at the end. As I said, at every point of time, the longest lens may not be the best thing to carry along. At certain times, a wide angle lens is much better. You can see this photograph of a baby camel. It is taken with a 10-17 fisheye lens. So it allowed me to go very near, and thereafter I clicked this photograph. Had I been clicked this photograph with 800mm lens, it wouldn't have come up so well. It's not always convenient to carry heavy tripods. When I'm there in a boat ride, I have always found that tripods are of no use. As such, your platform is not stable. So beanbags are the best options that I find in boat rides. When I want to pick up the camera in handhold conditions, I can do that freely. And when I want a stable platform, when the boat is stationary, I can just put it on the beanbag. When long hikes are involved in expeditions, it is better to carry monopods rather than heavy tripods. These are my personal choice. You are most welcome to vary, but these are my experiences that I'm sharing, which I have earned out of going into the wild. You can devise your own equipments, but what I'm trying to say is not every equipment is required to be carried in every expeditions. Once we are through with the research and planning factor, comes the shooting factor. Predetermine actions. As I said about a flying bird, we must know when the bird is going to take a flight. So you can see over here that a tree and an ostrich. I imagined this frame. I saw this tree and I saw a lot many ostriches roaming underneath. So I waited for this frame because I predetermined this frame. I waited when this bird will come in this position and it will create a connection. This balance in the frame, where the bird and the tree, that is what I was looking forward to, and that predetermination helped me to photograph this. Think different, as I said, unique perspective. I showed you one photograph in which a turtle was mounted on a caiman. That is what, if you see, you will also click in that very same perspective. But again, I thought what I can do different. So I flew my drone over them to create this mosaic shot of effect in which the caimans, the turtles, and the waves are creating a texture. The wide angle is the new telephoto. Again, as I said, the way we can approach wildlife, we can go near them, we can create much better photographs than our long lenses. Photographer is the best zoom. So we need ourselves to approach the wildlife without bothering the wildlife. I am underlining this, without bothering the wildlife. We just can't barge on somebody's head and click his photograph. That photograph is of no use in future then. So we need to give it time, give it or bring it to that comfortable zone so that it understands that, okay, this person does not mean harm. He is a part of the environment. He or she welcomes you in within his or her danger circle, and thereafter you can approach that particular species. You can act as a zoom and you can click a photograph like this. This is though a photograph of a Orinoco crocodile, a critically endangered. Only few hundreds are left. It is the largest crocodilian species of South America. It is called Orinoco crocodile, and I have taken a photograph by the method that I have shown in the previous slide. Again, approaching the wildlife. The snake that you can see underneath is a 25 feet long anaconda. Generally, anacondas create a lot of fear amongst us if we go by the movies, but they are the most decent snakes that I have seen in my entire life. They are the most decent snakes. I have worked with king cobras, I have worked with pythons, but anacondas are much larger than them, but are much more decent. Once you go or approach a wildlife, you can create frames like this. Now, about telling a story. As I said, most of us have seen the movie Lion King. If we realize after that, we have started calling every lion cub as Simba. Why? Because that movie has got such a deep impact within us. So if we can say such kind of stories through our image, it will definitely create an impact within the viewer. In this particular frame, you can see that a lion cub is pleading. It's just a childish gesture that, okay, let's go for playing or something of that sort. However, the more important thing in this image is the reaction of the mother. It is just like any other human mother. Okay, that he is a kid, he is not matured, he can bother me, but I should not be bothered. I should not be agitated. I should not be excited. I have got much greater important things to do in the entire day. I need to make kills. If I cannot kill a particular prey, then probably I'll remain hungry. And if I remain hungry, these cubs will also remain hungry and they will die. I need to keep these cubs safe from predators like hyenas. So that is the story which is painted over here. And the last point, as I said, is keep the post-processing in mind. You can see in this image a giant anteater. By the way, they are the largest anteaters in the world, and it has got a habit of carrying its baby in its back even much longer after the baby is weaned. So it basically carries the baby for about 1 year. Now, in this image, I was trying to photograph this. However, the light is from a very odd direction. Now, if I want to move around, if I want to place myself on the other side or something of that sort, what will happen is this moment will be gone, and I will not also get the face of the baby how I wanted. So I clicked this photograph as it is, knowing at that point of time, I always had this thing in my mind, how I am going to process this photograph, how I am going to bring the shadows out of the face of the mother anteater. When I had that thing in mind, I never tried to move around. I clicked the photograph like this way only. This is the unprocessed image. And when I processed the image, it looked somewhat like this. So that is how we must keep the post-processing in mind. Similarly, this is a very rare moment of a giant otter. Giant otters are, by the way, the largest otters in the world. They can grow up to 6 feet, and they can even kill caimans or small crocodiles. They are even threats to jaguars. They are very fierce. Now, coming on to this particular moment, that particular giant otter is carrying its cub in its mouth to save it from the caimans. The caimans, however, feed on the baby giant otters. Now, in this frame, if I think about rule of thirds and placing the subject in one of those PowerPoints as I discussed, this moment will be gone. They will just dive inside the water in the very next moment. But I know that I am going to crop this image because the subject is too small. So why should I try placing this subject on one of those PowerPoints and waste my time? So I clicked the photograph with the subject in the center of the frame, and I processed the image like this, so that, and when I clicked that photograph, I had this thing in mind. So I never opted to frame it and thereafter click it. So keeping post-processing in mind is very, very important. So to sum this section, I must say that we must learn the rules well before we must break them. So the first part was about learning the rules, and the second part was about breaking them in different ways. So we must learn the rules first and thereafter break them. And lastly, we must not think of clicking an award-winning photograph every other day. 4 in a year is a good crop. Ansel Adams said 2 in a year. In a digital age, I can say 4. If we get 4 good images in a year, we are doing good. So that we should keep in mind while making good images in the wild. Now, I am almost 1.5 hours through with my presentation. I'll just rush over through my last part, that is wildlife first. Now, before starting this section, I have just got two disclaimers to make. In this section, I am going to show you some cartoons which I have made, but those cartoons are inspired from a group or an organization called Green Humor. You can visit their page. You will get those particular cartoons in their page. These organization, if you do not know, they are doing a great job in inspiring people in saving wildlife. I have just imitated those cartoons in my own way, just because I cannot reproduce their work in my presentation. That's why I have made those cartoons by myself. And the second disclaimer is, from now on, whatever I am going to say is my personal opinion. You may or, you may or may not follow it, but as a beginner wildlifer, I felt that deficiency of somebody guiding me, saying that this is wrong and this is right. So I just wanted to say every wildlife photographer that if you go by these lines, you are not going to go wrong. Nobody teaches you how to love your near and dear ones. Similarly, nobody can teach you how to love wildlife. If you love wildlife, you will do it in your own way. You will take care of its safety first. So when I say safety first, that's what I mean, wildlife first. So my photographs come second. The wildlife in question comes first, always and every day. So what are the practices that we should not be doing in wildlife photography as a beginner photographer? I'm going to tell those. You can devise your own ways and means in your own capacity. Okay. First is overspeeding. In jungle safaris, we see that once we get a news that a tiger has been sighted at any particular location, we just press our driver, you just rush up to that place. What about those ground dwelling birds and reptiles? They gets butchered by those things. We just don't care. We kill so many ground living fauna while we rush towards our target tiger. And when we rush to that target tiger, we see a long line and we don't get our desired photograph also. So there is no point rushing like that. You gain knowledge, where to get, what to get. You will be there at the first chance to click the photograph of a tiger before anybody else. But there is no point to get a news and rush towards that place. Leave it. You are not going to get that out of the box way. Nest photography. Now, why nest photography is dangerous? Now, what happens is, once I say this, many people come up with saying, we have seen photographs in PSA, Photographic Society of America, and other groups where they have allowed nest photography. Fine enough. Why we discourage this is because there are certain birds who just abandons their nest if they see any threat or human presence nearby. Now, there are few birds, not all birds. For example, if we take a raptor, a raptor is not going to behave in that way. So, clicking a nest of a raptor is perfectly okay. But if we try and make people understand that don't click photograph of this bird, don't click, click photograph of this bird, it becomes very difficult. Moreover, we don't have sufficient knowledge. There are so many species which are not discovered also. So we don't know about all birds. So it's better that we discourage nest photography altogether. And one more thing happens. Once we click a photograph, the entire crowd follows. So that at times people go on destroying that particular nest, destroying the eggs. That is inhuman. So we should not be encouraging nest photography. Handling wildlife. We often handle wildlife to get good photographs. There are two main disadvantages of this. The species that we are handling may acquire infection that we are carrying in our body, and secondly, it might get a heart attack also. it might get a shock. Imagine yourself being handled by a huge demon. You will not know what to do. So that same thing can happen with a species that we are trying to handle. So it's not good to handle wildlife and take photographs. Baited photography. Now this is a very dichotomic activity. At times it appears, even I have done this in my earlier days, thinking that I am doing good to that species. If I offer a particular amount, a certain amount of food to any species, I'm doing good, I'm feeding it, and at the same time I'm getting a good shot also. But what happens is, firstly, the species in question gets lazy. At times it completely leaves its skills of hunting. It becomes dependent on human food. So we must not do that. That is breaking the nature. And secondly, our food, the thrown away food contains certain chemicals at times. And if you see the extinction of vultures, how the vultures have gone extinct, they have started feeding on the carcasses of the diet cattle. And why the diet cattle have affected their extinction? Because those cattle, those cows were injected with diclofenac for getting more milk. Now those diclofenac has affected the vulture population. So man-given food may result to wiping out of an entire species, a community. So we must not encourage baited photography. Chasing wildlife. Now this is a heinous crime. Ignorance cannot be an excuse for chasing wildlife. We have seen photographers chasing a particular wildlife up to an extent that it has got no energy left even to escape its predator. So chasing wildlife is a heinous crime, and we should not be encouraging it at any point of time. Even if we see people doing this at any point of time during our expeditions, we must report that to the nearest authority at the earliest. Flash photography. Now, flash photography is again a very debatable, topic. People say that we click on doing macro photography with flashes. Fine enough, good enough. Firstly, what we must understand what harm flash photography does. What happens is there are certain animals which are completely nocturnal. They depend on their night vision to make hunts. If we try and photograph them at night by using flash, what will happen is we will blind them temporarily, and that will discard them from the opportunity of making a kill. As such, their killing, the success of their killing attempts is very less. It is less than even 10%. They go for 100 attempts and they can make kill in 4 to 5 attempts. So if we blind them for a night, what will happen is we will again push them further towards starvation. So that is what happens. Now what happens in macro photography is most of the macro subjects are having compound eyes, and this thing does not affect the compound eyes. So this does not affect the macro subjects in that way. Still, the thing cannot be completely discarded. We must see if a species is not getting disturbed with flash, we can go ahead and do that. Now, there is a better option. That's what I'm trying to say. We can use low power lights. For example, if we are trying to photograph a particular species which is not available in day, and it's important to photograph it, we must use dim lights. That does not affect the species also, and it brings out the details in the body of the species also. If we use a high power flash, the subject gets blown out. It becomes white. It does not give a very pleasing photograph. So small power lights which can be projected from a side, from a particular side. So that helps in creating a good exposure also, and it does not blind the species also. Overcrowding, as I said in the first slide, never ever go for overcrowding. It will not give you a exceptional shot also, and it will bother the particular animal also. In tiger jungles, it happens whenever the season is on. All gypsies try to mount on that particular species. Imagine that the situation of that animal. The tiger is unable to reach its cub, which is lying on the other side of the road. That is what that is the stress that we are imparting on that particular species. So we should not be a part to this kind of activities. Bird calls. Now, bird calls is a very double-edged weapon. If we use it without having proper knowledge, which most of the beginner photographers do, it can cause debacle. When the birds are hidden from our vision, be rest assured that it is doing some important job. It can be an act of courtship. It can be an act of breeding, nest protection, whatever. If we use bird calls, it leaves that particular activity and comes in front of us. So we are disturbing its normal life, which we are not supposed to do. And secondly, there are many types of calls of a particular species. We don't have the adequate knowledge as a beginner. For example, we are playing the bird call of a particular bird. They have got 2 to 3 different tones. One is a friendly tone, one is a scaring away tone. That scaring away tone may shoo away that particular bird from that particular place, which may never come back. So we must take proper precautions, and actually we must discard using of bird calls. As such, as I said, the wildlife in question is much more important than the photograph itself. Third, responsibilities. We as photographers should not be confined only to click photographs and winning prizes. While we do so and we keep ourselves away from other activities, we are leaving the wildlife to their fate. That particular species has offered us, gifted us with such awesome frames. So it's our responsibility that when we go back to our home, or when we are not doing our photography, we must get involved in some sort of conservation activities or something of that sort. So that is what the responsibility of a photographer comes. With that, I come to the end of my presentation. And finally, I just want to say, don't run after gears as far as photography is concerned. If you can catch up with some money, invest in some good expeditions. Both are equally costly, a gear and an expedition. An expedition will fetch you more experiences which will stay with you for life, whereas a gear you will discard the gear for sure in 5 to 10 years. So whenever you can get some money, go in for traveling rather than investing in gears. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. Okay, now I have come to the comment section. Okay, Devan Gayan, hello Puskar sir, thank you so much to be here with us. Thank you so very much. Shanko, tumio Gurudev amar. Okay, I'll just go over the questions. Chandramouli Ganguly, do you recommend the horizon to be remain tilted? If not, then why did not you correct that? Do not you think in the purple heron image the blurred subject is distracting? Why no reply from the presenter? Chandramouli, sorry, I was busy in the presentation. That's why I was unable to reply to your questions. If you are still on, I'll just try and reply to your questions. First, do you recommend the horizon to remain tilted? I believe you are saying this question regarding that snow leopard photograph. The horizon was tilted. I don't recommend a horizon which is actually flat is required to be tilted. That is very wrong doing in as far as this thing is concerned. Photography is concerned. We must not tilt horizons. What I said is, if we can find a tilted horizon, like that photograph of that snow leopard, we can use it as a diagonal object in our photograph, and that will add on to the dynamicity. Do you think in the purple heron image the blurred subject is distracting? Blurred subject or the blurred background? Because the photograph that I have shown, I believe the subject was in focus. It was not blurred. Though there were certain distracting objects definitely in the background, and those are part of the frame. I cannot do much about it. Everything will be answered after. Okay. So you okay. Why do not use of exposure compensation? It matters a lot for both low light and against the light. Chandramouli, I have explained the use of exposure compensation in that limited time that I could have. Thank you, Orijita. Thank you so much. The tail of the crocodile is not present. I believe, Chandramouli, you are saying the photograph in which I have projected about the color of the background. Yes, that is the fault of the image. I do accept that. But again, that is what the nature offered me at that point of time. I cannot do much about it. Though that creates a very different frame. We can, as we say, that portrait photographs are of different kinds. So it can be considered in that way. Obviously, I would have loved the tail to be inside the frame, but then the tail was actually on the bank or in the land, and hence I opted to crop it out. Have you saturated too much the mouth of the croak? No, I have not. Good afternoon. Please share with us any experience you had while photographing Royal Bengal tiger, especially it was in Sundarbans. Thanks. Pavel, actually, I can tell lot many experiences that I had along with the tigers. But rather than Sundarbans, I like to say that the best experience I had was in Manas National Park, and it was way back in 2004 when strolling on foot was allowed in Manas National Park. And at that time, I went on foot and I was able to see a tiger, for example, 10 to 15 meters away from me, and I was also on foot and the tiger was also on foot. And we were just tracking the tiger for good amount of 4 to 5 hours. So that was a hell of an experience. And while tracking that tiger, I saw so much of wildlife. I walked through the jungle. That was an experience of a lifetime, which I'll never be able to forget. Just a suggestion, if you could have made this session a live chat question, then it would have been more interactive. Okay, Chandramouli, point taken. I believe Wings will take care of that. Thank you so much, Chandramouli. Fantastic shot of the lioness with the cub. Thanks. Chandramouli Ganguly, are these shots from Pentanal? No, these shots are not from Pentanal. These are from a particular part of Colombia called Los Llanos. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Devan, for the cartoons. Thank you. Ronak Ghosh, diclofenac is a NSAID used as a painkiller. Very correct. But the medicine that we used to inject those cows with also had this diclofenac, and that is what which has wiped out this vulture population. Partially, I do not support here, as man-made carcass dumpyard at Jodhpur, Bikaner has brought many vultures in Rajasthan. The reason of vulture numbers declined due to the chemical used in crop fed by cattle. Correct, Chandramouli. In fact, what you are saying is what we see in kitchen also. We can see demoiselle cranes gathering in that particular area because people over there feed those animals. That's what I said, Chandramouli, that whatever I said is just for the beginner photographers to start with. After that, once you spend a lot of time in the wild, you devise your own ways and means. That is what I started with when starting that part of the presentation. There is no hard and fast rules. You can even go on clicking nests of a particular bird if you have that adequate knowledge that this bird will not fly away after seeing you. So everything can be broken provided you have that knowledge. A beginner photographer who first goes into the wild can get involved or indulged in any kind of such activities without having such proper knowledges. These cartoons are just to give the initial guidance, nothing else. Photography for conservation, indeed a very informative part of the session. Where we can goes to the can say. Would you able to take full body image of a rain babbler in Himalaya without bird call? Chandramouli, that's what I am saying. Ki, if I am not able, probably I'll not take. That's what I was trying to say. However, I have clicked Tisia. I have clicked Tisia without using bird calls. You have said in the next question. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Shampika Seal, sir, any suggestion for making more quality pictures of macro photography? I have actually not covered the macro photography in a way as such. I don't do much of macro photography, but as far as macro photography is concerned, again, similar kind of study, learning comes into play. You need to understand the subject. And in macro photography, what I understand is you need to have a better understanding of your focusing and your lighting. If you can do that, you will be able to create good images. Debayan Gayan, please share your snow leopard expedition / experience. Snow leopard is definitely a very, very good experience. I went into Kiber in 2018 for clicking the snow leopards, and it was an amazing experience because at that point of time, I was always on a spin. I never halted in my homestay. I used to roam around in the snow in search of the leopards. That has fetched good movements. What happens is people go over there, and because of cold and all, people stay inside their rooms, and when they hear that a snow leopard is sighted, they rush for that location. However, in my case, I was always there out, and hence I was always there to click the first photograph. So that's how I got good images. Suraj Tiwari, I'm a budding photographer and basically working on landscape photography. I want to start wildlife photography. How to start working on this? try and get as much knowledge as possible. Start with a basic camera and a basic lens. Go on. I'll say go on this thing, clicking things in your while. Try your hands, and thereafter you'll develop. And after that, you can actually graduate onto other equipments in that way. Thank you, Orpita De. Thank you. Thank you, Chandramoli. Thank you so much. Sir, I'm a bird. Suraj Tiwari, okay. Thank you, Ronak. Thank you. Saptarshi, thank you. Thank you. So with that, I have come to the end of the question part. Anybody else? Anything? Okay, Shagar, I think I am through with the presentation. So shall I be stopping the live now? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for such a nice audience. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, Puskar sir, for this on the basics of the wildlife photography. Hope you will be with us again sometime in the long